Hi, IBESS. This is your first video notes. You are going to be taking notes as I say them. Do this at your own time. Feel free to pause, fast forward, rewind, go back. It is intended so that you can do this in the time frame that works for you. So have a piece of binder paper out, take notes, pause, and review things as needed. Here we go. We're going to start with some definitions, and the first definition that you need to be aware of is moral agents. And these are those people who have the freedom and rational capacity to be responsible for choices. These are basically the deciders or the decision makers, people who have the freedom to make choices. These are those capable of making moral reflection and moral decisions. So you have to be like mentally sound, of the right age. So an example would be an adult human of sound mind. Infants and mentally infirm adults are not moral agents. They cannot make decisions for society, sometimes for themselves, and certainly for others. Not too long ago in our history, women, Black people, and poor people in the United States were not moral agents. And even today, in many parts of the world, this is still true. So this is something that changes with society. We determine who are moral agents and who are not moral agents. Again, these are the deciders. And what moral agents do is they determine who or what has moral standing. If you have moral standing, your continued existence or welfare in itself is valuable. You have intrinsic value. You can live just because you are. Your interests and well-being are weighed when deciding what is permissible to do. So examples, for the United States today, humans of all kind have moral standing. So babies have moral standing, children, adults, old people, etc. Now women have moral standing. People of different races have moral standing. People of different cultures have moral standing. And right now in the United States, again, moral standing changes with society, right? So moral agents decide who has moral standing. And one of the biggest debates we have today is, does a fetus have moral standing? A fetus is a developing embryo that can't survive outside of the womb. So there's big arguments. Should it have moral standing? Should it be allowed to exist because it has intrinsic value in itself? So the big question is it alive? And this is up for major debate. But again, moral standing is having intrinsic value to exist. Moral duties, our third big vocab word. Moral duties are those duties that moral agents have towards others and other people and other things. So that which is owed by moral agents to those with moral standing. Essentially, what moral standings are we going to give to people and things? And that is determined by moral agents. So for example, it is wrong to kill our children because we have a moral duty towards them. So we have moral duties to living and non-living things. And again, this changes as society changes. So now we have a moral duty to our children, right? They have intrinsic value. They have moral standing. But it wasn't that long ago that children did not have moral standing. Yes, they were children, but they were property of the parents. And parents can kind of do with them as they pleased, for good and for bad. So it is, we have moral duties towards our pets, right? But still, we can make some pretty intense decisions on their behalf. So moral duties are the decisions that we make, or I should say moral agents make, for those that we have determined have moral standing. So here's the big question. Who or what has moral standing and why? This is the big philosophical issue. Does the ecosystem have moral standing? So we have to look at the criteria for moral standing much more deeply. So what moral duties do we, those with moral agents, have towards those with moral standing? And there's different ethical positions that are going to suggest different moral duties, and it depends on basically where your ethics lie. Okay, so let's look at like the criteria that exists. Again, this is Yosemite National Park. We have decided that moral agents have decided that Yosemite Park has moral standing, and our moral duty towards Yosemite National Park is to protect it, to keep it clean, to make sure there's no hunting, to try to keep it as pristine as possible. So those are the moral duties that moral agents have determined for Yosemite National Park because we have deemed that it has moral standing. So here's the criteria for moral standing. We're going to go through a spectrum. Okay, so we've decided as a society that typically, if you're a Homo sapien sapien, you have membership for moral standing. Like you're allowed to exist for the sake of the fact that you have intrinsic value. And we think that we have made this decision because humans have a soul. And humans are moral agents. Like, again, adults who are not infirm are responsible for knowing right from wrong. We have a giant frontal lobe that allows us to do this. And that intelligence is what has allowed us to determine basically all of this: moral agents, moral standing, moral duties for ourselves and for others. Okay. And we have something called personhood. We have a consciousness, and we don't know where it comes from. We don't know what it's due to, and we're not sure what else has it. And the other reason we have given ourselves moral standing is because we have a language. We can communicate all of this. So in the United States, we've given ourselves, humans, moral standing. But again, not that long ago, women, Latinos, Chinese, Irish, Jews, so on and so forth, Muslims did not have moral standing. And I would argue that right now there's certain groups of people that have diminished moral standing. In the case of genocide and ethnic cleansing, humans do not have moral standing. We have stripped moral standing away from at least a group of humans whenever those types of things happen, which is, again, pretty astounding when you're standing back looking at that, like, again, from the news or history. You think of all these things, humans have a soul, we're moral agents, we're intelligent, we have personhood, we have language. How can we do that to one another, right? So whenever we look at history, it's gross that we do that to one another. We're going to now look at where does this extend to, okay? So if an organism is sentient, meaning has the ability to feel pain, we tend to give moral standing to those organisms. So this is why things like animal testing in zoos are an issue, right? Would we put a human in a zoo? No, that's called prison. We wouldn't do that if they were innocent, right? Would we do animal testing on humans without their consent? No. But why do we do this for other sentient beings? That's why those types of things, animal testing and zoos, are so controversial. It's because we do give moral standing to organisms that we know can feel pain. So then there's that secondary question. How do you know what can and can't feel pain? We know a gorilla can feel pain because we could see the emotions, they could even communicate, right? Like the criteria for that we give humans moral standing. So the great apes pretty much have the ability to do all those things that Homo sapiens sapien have, pretty much. But what about ants? What about planaria? How do we know if they can or can't feel pain? Maybe we just don't have the tools to be able to determine that, but they do feel pain. And then what about things like circumcising baby males? We know that males can feel pain, yet we do this anyways. So where do we draw the line? Continuing on this criteria, we can extend it to anything that is alive. So it extends to pretty much all living things, plants and animals. And here it begs the question, what is the difference between one apple and a grove of redwoods? We know there is a difference, but what is that difference? What is that tangible thing? Why do we give greater moral standing to a grove of redwoods and don't think twice about eating an apple? In fact, eating an apple we think is a great thing. I eat an apple pretty much every day. So, we can continue this as to anything that is part of nature. So we extend moral standing to earth, ecosystems, rocks, river, plants, animals, the entire natural world. Here's the big thing. Just because you give something moral standing means it has the right to exist, but it does not mean it has the right to indefinite existence. Hence, we need to think about how we honor, revere, or take care of it, or it being a thing, such as some rocks, minerals, an animal, a plant, or a person. There's a new law that very recently came into place, the Die with Dignity law, which allows people who are terminally ill to elect to do like take medical pills to end life. So the Die with Dignity law. And it's very controversial, but it kind of goes back to that. Humans have moral standing. We have given moral rights to ourselves. We are moral agents. And as part of being a moral agent, we can also determine when something is ready to go. And this is where our ethical positions come into play, right? When is it a good time to take a rock, a river, a plant, an animal, part of the ecosystem? When should we keep it? And that's a big chunk of what we're going to be talking about all year long. So the ethical positions we're going to be exploring are on like a scale, okay? And we're going to start with Anthropocentric and then go to Ecocentric. We're going to start on the right and move left as we continue our conversation, okay? So what anthropocentric is, and this again is where most of Western society lies, is that only humans have intrinsic value and moral standing. The rest of the world has something called instrumental value, meaning it's only useful to humans, right? So trees, for example, especially at the early 1900s in the logging community, were instrumental, meaning they're only here so that we can use them. They don't have moral standing on their own, right? Only humans have moral standing and intrinsic value. So this is anthropocentric, something benefiting only humans. On that scale of anthropocentric, a little bit more extreme is something called cornucopia. And what cornucopia says is that the world has infinite resources to benefit humanity. And this is due to technology and inventions that human can solve any environmental problem. So standards of living can continually improve, and this is very growth oriented. And this is where capitalism and free market economy kind of lie here, because capitalism says that that everything is here to benefit us, and that we can constantly improve, and there has to be increased growth. However, this is the problem, scientifically speaking. The first law of conservation of matter says that matter cannot be created nor destroyed, right? It's only recycled. So matter cannot enter or leave Earth. We get what we get, that's it. So once we run out of one form of matter, it changes to a different form of matter. So if we run out of fossil fuels, for example, it's going to take many millions of years to get more fossil fuels. And we have to figure out how to live in this world without that resource. So we don't have infinite resources. We have finite resources. Hence, this is a problematic ethical position given the first law of matter, of conservation of matter. Technocentrism is also under the umbrella of anthropocentrism. And what this is saying is that we are environmental managers, that Earth is a garden that needs tending or stewardship. And a lot of really great conservation organizations, such as Ducks Unlimited, preserve wetlands. And they preserve wetlands because if wetlands aren't preserved, then there's no ducks, and ducks cannot be hunted. So Ducks Unlimited is a hunting organization. And again, they do a ton of amazing work to preserve wetlands. But the end goal for preserving that wetlands, or not but and the end goal of preserving that wetlands is to preserve the ducks, which then can be hunted. So again, it's not a simple good bad thing. It's just reasons why we protect the earth. Saving the rainforest, for example, because it provides oxygen and medicine for humans, is another stewardship reason for being in environmental management. Most Western religions fall in this category. Christianity, Judaism, Islam all fall into the category. All the religious texts talk about how the earth is a garden that needs tending. So humans are here to take care of what was placed here for us. Okay. So now we're going to start moving towards the middle. So here's a question. So sentiocentrism, basically, if it's a sentient organism, again, can feel pain, then they have moral standing. Okay, so the rest of the natural world has instrumental value. So both humans and sentient animals have the right, and those rights should be considered. So again, as pet owners, we probably fall into this category. By the way, we don't fall into any one category for everything, right? Sometimes we might fall into the anthropocentric category for certain things. We might fall into the ecocentric category for other things, and then for things like pets, I would argue that most of us are probably sentiocentric when it comes to our pets. So it's not that it's very fluid where we lie based on the issue that we're talking about. Now we're going to start moving towards the left, towards ecocentrism. And what ecocentrism is saying is basically that this is life-centered morality, that humans are not more or less important than any other living thing. So all living things and individual organisms, not species or ecosystems, right? So like the cute monkey, the panda bear, the koala, okay? These have intrinsic and moral standing. And that humans are not superior to other life forms, but that we are just as important as every other organism, and that we should therefore minimize harm and interference with nature. So an example of this would be to eat vegetarian, since it requires less land to be cultivated and ends up providing the resources for all living things. We're going to move further left, and this is biocentric. So remember, ecocentric was giving moral standing to individual organisms. Now we're going to talk about moral standing to ecosystems, okay? So non-individual, such as the earth and other interconnected systems, species, and natural processes have moral standing or intrinsic value, and therefore are deserving of respect. So we need to think about the whole community, and that we should strive to preserve balance, because that's going to benefit us, it's going to benefit the ecosystem, that we are no more nor less important than the ecosystem. So we have equal moral standing with everything on Earth. So one ant equals another ant, which equals the tree that they live in. Human death and tree death are the same in terms of how much intrinsic value they have, because the death of a life is the death of a life, right? We're going to move further left, and now we're going to look at something called deep ecology. And this is where humans are deeply connected with nature, not apart from it at all. And remember, we are animals, and animals don't know, I haven't talked to an animal and asked and had this conversation with them, but it seems as if animals don't view themselves as separate from the ecosystem that they're a part of. And so this is where ecocentrism lies, that humans too are animals, and that we don't see ourselves as any different from the ecosystem we are a part of, that we identify ourselves as part of nature, and therefore are taking care of the natural world that we're a part of. So it's the idea that nature has intrinsic value in its own right. So here's the thing. How can we actually do this? How can we lead a life that is more ecocentric, and maybe sometimes less anthropocentric, sometimes less technocentric, and certainly less cornucopia? And this is by being bioregional. Okay, it's a way to be. It's to lead a simpler life with local production of foods and other products by people that you know. And what that does is it increases our environmental awareness and caring and decreases exploitation of both the ecosystem and people. And part of this class is about learning how we can be more sustainable. That doesn't mean that we have to give up the things we love, but how can we enjoy the things we love in a more sustainable way, given that matter cannot be created on this earth, right? Cannot be created in this universe. And matter doesn't leave this system. So we kind of get what we get. So I want to end with a quote from Sitting Bull. And he had a speech that he gave to his people after he met with Congress. And he's an example of a deep ecologist. So this is Sitting Bull in 1877 talking about the world and how the world has changed. Behold, my brothers, the spring has come. The earth has received the embraces of the sun, and we shall soon see the results of that love. Every seed has awakened, and so has all animal life. It is through this mysterious power that we too have our being, and we therefore yield to our neighbors, even our animal neighbors, the same right as ourselves, to inhabit this land. Yet, hear me, my people, we have now to deal with another race, small and feeble when our fathers first met them, but now great and overbearing. Strangely enough, they have mind to till the soil, and love of possessions is a disease with them. They claim this mother of ours, the earth, for their own, and fence their neighbors away. They deface her with their buildings and their refuse. They threaten to take the land away from us. My brothers, shall we submit, or shall we say to them, first kill me before you take possession of my fatherland? And I leave you with that.